All
All
right,
right.
cool.
So, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, why did you call me here?
Yeah. What are we doing?
Yeah, boy!
Smile.
Okay, here we go. You ready? Silence!
Welcome back to Exit 181, the podcast where I, Matt Duncan,
And ID Bianchi.
discuss music and the history of our friendship together, which is rooted in being in bands and sharing music over the last 30 plus years. We've just recently made a switch in our format, so we've had some video episodes up on YouTube. We're back here with an audio only version of the podcast, and we're hoping that this is getting out to more people. But if you want to check us out, we do have a website that is exit181.chaosspirals.com. That's CHAOSPIRALS.com. And we are hoping to broaden our audience. If you want to interact with us, we've got a Facebook group as well. You can also go to YouTube, find our video episodes, and interact with us there as well. So this is our second episode back on audio only. We've decided to try to increase our frequency, and this week we're trying something a little different as well as far as our topic and our format. So Dean, I'm going to discuss with you the news of the week in music as I have stumbled across it, and so I'm interested in.
Is this going to be all Taylor Swift conversation?
This is not, because I
understand it was her birthday, and then apparently.
And she's dating that football player from Kansas City, and her movie is still
because he's from Cleveland. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
and her movie's still raking in cash.
Every day.
I don't know. Like, my school where I teach at a private high school in the Chicagoland area, just did a Swift Posium where kids from, I think, 4th grade on up to 12th grade could present their individual private research on Taylor Swift in a morning session that several kids presented and made arguments about. They were basically reacting to this one teacher who has a great disdain for Taylor Swift. And so
I'm kind of indifferent. I mean, to be honest, I'm like, I don't have anything against her. I just don't know her music really. So
I think some of her stuff is catchy. I'm stunned by just the insanity of the last 6 months of that woman's career, because that summer tour and like the insanity of people just paying to park and listen to the concert from the parking lot while they spent $300 on t-shirts. There's a lot of crazy.
Wasn't there a whole thing like in Brazil or somewhere where
somebody died?
People literally waited like weeks.
Yeah, and someone then was injured badly enough, I believe, to die. I don't know. There's some. I don't get it, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, she's going to be performing for decades as long as she remains healthy. I wish her well. Right. I don't harbor any ill will. I think she's done some really smart things as far as her career, but she's able to do those things because she made so much money that she didn't need a label anymore. So, I didn't anticipate talking about Taylor Swift at all, so I just would like to note that you brought her up, not me.
I did. I sorry.
So,
let's please go to the news of the week. That is not Taylor Swift's birthday.
Okay, so one of the first pieces of news that from this week is that Skinny Puppy performed their very last concert.
Yes.
In the last week and a half or so. They have called it quits after 41 years. They played their last shows. I subscribe to Kevin Key's Patreon thing, so I saw his kind of follow-up after it happened. I think there's sort of a bittersweet thing. I know that like they didn't tour anywhere other than the U.S. and Canada this go round. I got to see the first part of the farewell tour back in the summer. It was incredibly stupidly expensive to get tickets to a show that was, a regular club show. There were seats, but you weren't really buying a seat. You could sit if you got lucky, but it wasn't worth it because everybody was standing anyway. They played, a greatest hits sort of set list. It was fine. They weren't as gross and gruesome and performance arty as every other time I've seen Skinny Puppy, and I think I've seen them 4 or 5 times now. Yeah, I've seen them 5 times now. Yeah, it was a fine concert, but it didn't like punch me in the face with "this is the end" and "oh my god, the pinnacle of Skinny Puppy shows." Like,
right?
We went to see Skinny Puppy in 1992.
It was
1991.
Somewhere
92.
The Fox Theater in Detroit.
Yep.
I remember that. That was my first time seeing them, and I only saw them one more time. I saw them in 2015.
Okay. I saw them on the Too Dark Park tour. Then I saw that show with you. So, that was about a year and a half apart, those two shows. And then I saw their first tour back when they released Greater Wrong of the Right. So that was like 2003, 4, 2000, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I saw them one more time on like the very next follow-up tour to that. And then I saw this one. And this one was the least impressive from a stage show perspective, but these guys are 60. They're not like avant-garde young guys anymore. They were plenty fine. Like it was a good show. It was also though very clear that there was Ogre and there was the rest of the band. And the rest of the band seems like, they gel together, they play together, they, brap out together, whatever. But then Ogre comes in and does his vocal stuff. And that's kind of, it. I don't know. I think it's smart of them to, like, just call it a day. I don't think either one of them is going to stop making music.
Seems like, Kevin Key's got 9,000 other things going on. So it's definitely not, I don't know what Ogre's going to be up to or what.
He's still doing the Ogre thing, his solo-ish project. And I read that he was collaborating with somebody else too. So yeah, he's still got stuff going on. Yeah, these guys aren't stopping making music. They're just not going to make music together. And I don't think they've really made music together.
How old? Mythmaker is already 10 years old, 8 years old.
Close, yeah. It's old. It's a while. So, I don't think we're really, missing out. When they called it off after Dwayne Gattel's death and then got back together first for that Doomsday Festival, that live performance that they did, it was like, ooh, look out, here they come. And then they've steadily released albums over a period of about 15 years, I guess. And hey, good for them. Well, they released albums for more like 10, I guess, but they occasionally would tour or whatever. And some of that stuff's really good. It's not stuff that speaks to me the way the older stuff does, but that doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, they're all listenable. There's all kinds of great stuff going on those records. But I think their passions lie elsewhere, and they don't really even interact much beyond, their business arrangement, their professional arrangement. So I'd rather see what they want to be doing rather than something they feel obligated to do. Yeah.
It's interesting bands like that, especially bands that we listen to through their career, and to think about, so we were in a band together, and, where we're at now with having these conversations and staying friends for a long time and stuff, like, what is that? And this is totally a sidebar, but so say Charlotte's Web kept going, got some kind of traction, and now what does that mean 30 years later in terms of our friendship or
Yeah.
Like there's a lot, like it's, we have a connection and a friendship, and there's probably some capacity that sort of distance and catching up and all those kind of things play a role that, if we were literally like contractually obligated to travel together and spend time in hotels together for 6 months a year and do all kind, I mean, like I'm guessing that's the stuff that sort of kind of breaks apart some of these friendships and band things, and people, you don't know where someone's creative space is going to go over the course of 30 years. Is it really going to, are they really going to gel together in the same direction for that long? And, I mean, it's kind of a sidebar, but that's like it seems to be more common. You hear those stories, the bands that are around for 30 years and that are somehow all really tight and connected is a really rare.
Right. Yeah. And I think about it, like, I used to, we all have these romantic notions of how bands interact, and that, they're these buddies who, live together all this time, and there's a reason they were so good together, blah, 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 whatever. And I think about being in Charlotte's Web, and like Andrew and I were roommates, and we were really, really good friends. And so the two of us coming into the band together, originally I knew Charlotte, and she was in a different band, and she's like, hey, why don't you try this out? And I was like, I've never done that before. And she's like, so what? Just try it. And so she had been playing music with Mark and Eric for a while. And so I said I'd come in, and then she said, well, why don't you ask Andrew to come too? And then, you guys can figure out what you want to do. And if one of you wants to sing or the other one does, or if you want to do it together, like, we can figure out what's going to happen. And we're like, okay, let's give it a shot. And it took a little while to warm up to it. Once Eric, became a grandparent and left the band, and then Mark was facing surgery, and like, you joined the band, and we went through the next, 4 drummers, 5 almost.
Of the Spinal Tap.
I mean,
that we had,
but, and once, Charlotte's romantically connected to Jeff, and Jeff comes in, like, I think that was good for me as like a wake up call, like a really humanizing element that, like, I barely knew Jeff, and Jeff and I had very different views on the world.
Right.
And I think we were good in the band together. We didn't have to be best buddies to make some really good songs. And I mean, that dude was a hell of a musician and versatile. Like, he had a range, and he brought something to the band that wasn't there before he joined. And it was a valuable part of where we ended up and when we did that recording. But like, I have no idea where that guy is now. I have no idea how I would even like connect with him again. He might still be in Toledo for all I know. But like, so there's a reality set in that, like, hey, a band isn't always like the best buddies and, a family and,
right,
tour bus brothers and all that kind of, no. There's a lot of arrangements. And once we needed drummers, like, once we were like, shit, we got to get somebody to play some drums on these tunes because we just can't do it. Like, that guy, what was his name? Garrett? He played the one Fremont show with us. I think his name was Garrett.
Well, there was the Scott guy.
Scott and Jimmy. Scott and Jimmy were the two dudes from...
Scott and Jimmy were the two...
Yeah, they were from Fremont, right? And Jimmy was in Catastrophe, and Scott was in another one of those...
the guy that was, like, in jail, like, 9 hours before one of the shows or something?
Yeah, he was the first, like, replacement drummer we got, and then he discharged a firearm inside the city limits of, like, Perrysburg or something, and so he was sort of on the run, and we didn't know if he was going to show up, so we had
I still remember
Steve
that week where where
Steve came for like 3 days and played
and, like,
all of our songs for like 7 hours a day. Yeah. He did all that fakey double bass drumming. Yeah. Like, he only had one pedal, but he made it sound like double bass when he had to. Yeah. And that dude, I never knew Steve as well as you did, but that just impressed me. Like, what a musician, what a technician. Like, I just watching him try to count along with Charlotte's crazy time signatures and just work out where all the changes were. Just that was a little mini masterclass in like somebody who just is a working musician who can.
Yeah. I mean, he's probably one of the most talented people that I ever just jammed with. I never was like in a band with him, really.
Yeah, I almost wish he had played that show. You know,
I do. No, I do wish.
I mean,
played that show. Like,
yeah,
just
I
'cause
totally.
also,
that would have been a different show.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think because I was in the Back Monkeys for a hot second, which was a band that was in Cleveland and had like 9 million different members, and Steve was playing drums then. So that I've played on stage with him once or twice, but.
And Steve, you know, his longest sort of most high profile gig was in Per Ubu, right? And then was he also ever in, what was that band that Mark Gamere was in?
Oh, The Wake? No.
He wasn't in The Wake?
No.
Okay.
He was in a band called the Heathers for a long time.
Okay.
A lot of local Cleveland 90s, 2000s kind of stuff. You could very often find Steve playing drums for
a
lot of different stuff, but
yeah, he was just like impressive. It was just really cool watching him work.
So the other thing I was thinking of, like as we were talking about this though, like I wonder, you know, so there's that part of it, like just the band and the dynamics of the people and how that sort of changes. And then I wonder when you look at something like Skinny Puppy and, you know, these guys being around each other for 40 years, is there just something to being, you're in your 40s and you're in your 50s and it's a very different, you know, like I would, you know, I would love to play in a band.
Yeah.
But whatever approach I would take to collaborating on writing songs with somebody or doing this, it would come from such a totally different place than
absolutely
the brain of a 22-year-old or a 23-year-old.
Well, like you know, a lot of that passion and that sort of naive optimism of like what I'm saying has significance and could somehow touch somebody and change, like especially lyrically. Jesus, the pretension of some of the stuff we were thinking we were accomplishing.
Well, but the people that were listening to us were in that same
they're right there with us.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you write those lyrics as a 50-year-old, and
it's different.
You're no longer talking to other 50-year-olds,
right?
Trying to talk to 20-year-olds at that point, or vice versa. What do you write about as a 50-year-old? Like, you know, you're not pulling from the same pool of life things because
that's
I'm not really
true.
gonna write a bunch of songs about, you know, like I got home from work and I had to cut the lawn, you know, like
right.
like,
right. and like, you know, we were there's a freedom to being kind of ignorant of the realities of like politics and stuff, that like, when you write songs about politics that you don't fully understand, you can say a bunch of shit that like now I would be like, do I really mean that? Am I critiquing myself? You know, like there's another whole angle on Yuppie's prayer. You know, as I sit here in front of my, you know, probably $4,000 worth of computer equipment. Like,
no, but then when you're talking about these bands that have been around a long time, that's, you know, I mean, some of them, like, so obviously, you know, when you're talking about the Rolling Stones or some kind of band, that's like that's a different.
Who just put out an album, right? There's the news again.
But that's, you know, but then something like Skinny Puppy, so they, you know, they made it in the context of that type of music. I'm sure they are known as one of the top tier bands in that realm, but they're not like, you know, they're not
U2 or the Rolling Stones.
And so, yeah. I mean, it's just, there's a whole, you could sit and try to untangle that dynamic part of it that is, and you know, and a band like that was also clearly all of their stuff, you know, obviously, you know, anyone wants to go watch our Skinny Puppy video episode. I mean, it's, you know, the stuff they were talking about and singing about and writing about and doing videos about, you know, I mean, everything was layered in all kinds of politics and human rights and all these things, you know, where it's like,
animal rights.
So it wasn't, it wasn't just some band singing about,
Right.
dating a girl and blah, 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 whatever. So
It's interesting. Ogre did an interview after they put out The Greater Wrong of the Right, which came out during George W. Bush, his term, and the post 9/11 war in Iraq and invasion of Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff. And people jumped to a bunch of conclusions, especially in the interviews that were happening about the greater wrong of the right, meaning the right wing. And Ogre was really sort of cagey and kind of nuanced with it. And he was like, look, yeah, it can mean that, but also it can mean a lot of other things, like the greater wrong of the people who think that they're right. As in correct, as in morally correct, as in morally superior. Yeah, and, always all the puns and stuff in that band's music, the titles are all these plays on words and manipulating, the double meaning of things and stuff like that. If you're looking for the easy read, it's not there, and I thought it was cool that it still wasn't there, but they still were critiquing things.
Right.
And they kind of understood how to move forward from the things that were important to them in 1991 compared to 2004 or 5 or whenever it was.
Right.
So, good transition point. In related news, Cyberaktif just put out an album, or at least a single. And
I think the album's coming. It looks like.
I think you're right.
Because I've only heard the single.
And so the importance of this is that Kevin Key from Skinny Puppy and, the departed Dwayne Cattell were in this one-off band with Bill Lieb from Frontline Assembly and also Delirium. And Frontline Assembly just toured last summer, I think. And Delirium, I believe, just put out an album as well. And now Cyberaktif's got a thing, and this is the first time they've put out a single since 1991. So this is an interesting development, but it's cool because this was like, I always thought that Cyberaktif album was like the Skinny Puppy album that we didn't get, it's very different from Skinny Puppy in a lot of ways, but there's definitely more of that vibe. It's not like the other sort of ambient kind of experimentally stuff.
To me, it always lived in a space between Skinny Puppy and Hilt.
Yeah.
To me, like it had these weird little Hilt bits to it.
Yeah.
Kind of, and it's got a lot of Frontline Assembly, like early Frontline Assembly.
And his vocal styling was, distorted-ish, but it wasn't the crazy stream of consciousness that Ogre was doing.
Right.
So I always liked that, like, you could follow the lyrics and they kind of made sense in a way for a casual listener was a little more accessible.
Yeah.
But that album's great. Like, Tenebrae Vision, right? That's the title of the first one. That's a great album. Anybody who has never heard it should go check it out, especially if you like, that sort of late 80s, early 90s industrial stuff. I didn't realize.
Did you listen to the song?
Yeah. I listened to it, and it's good. I liked it well enough.
Yeah,
it didn't grab me.
Right.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it doesn't scream Cyberaktif to me. It feels very early Frontline Assembly to me. It's kind of just, I liked it, but it wasn't new-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't like, I guess, and we'll see. I mean, they have a whole album to still hear. I wonder, like, because that Cyberaktif album lives in its own little bubble.
Yeah.
It's not in that genre. I mean, there's only so much you kind of vary, but it has its own a slightly unique sound. So this to me didn't fit that. Like if you just played it and I didn't know who it was, I would have guessed it was early Frontline Assembly probably.
So the
I wouldn't
interesting
have guessed Cyberaktif.
Well, yeah. Well, that makes some sense. So I'm looking at releasemagazine.net, and they've got this December 8th, 2023 write-up on it. And Johan Carlson is the byline here. And it's interesting. first of all, I didn't realize that Blixa Bargeld from Neubauten was on that Frontline Assembly album. I guess I just never put that together for some reason. But the inside scoop here seems to be that Kevin Key was working on a new Skinny Puppy album, and then they decided to break up. So he had these tracks that were going to be aimed at Ogre, adding vocals to them, and they decided, nope, that's not going to happen. So he's like, well, what am I going to do with this? And so he got in touch with the guys from Frontline Assembly, and they came on and worked on the tracks with them.
Well,
and then
we listened to it then.
Yeah. So also Kevin Key did the video game Silent Hill Ascension soundtrack, and the guy that he collaborated with on that is a guy named Eric Peterson, and so he worked on it too. And so the single's out now, and the full-length album is called Endgame, and it is supposed to come out in February. But that's pretty cool that he found a way to kind of turn that around, and I don't know. It's just kind of nice to see new stuff in that vein by these guys that I like their work in their various other projects. But it shocked me. I was like, what the hell are they talking about? Like Cyberaktif. Like if ever I was gonna guess that in 2024, a band in scare quotes was going to put out an album, that's not the group I would have guessed was reforming or anything. Just totally out of the blue.
I think some of that, now that you're saying what that article is saying, though, I mean, that really speaks to kind of Kevin Key really being a kind of a big pioneer in that genre, and he probably doesn't get his due in that, you dropped it as part of a sentence, but I know he's done like soundtracks for film and video games, and he's involved in multiple different
it's talking about like
all kinds of crazy
somebody
projects.
who lives their music. Holy crap, that dude seems to do nothing but music.
He's got solo albums, and he's involved in 10 different bands, and very well connected to all of those different
absolutely
people,
and impressive just the amount of connection he's working to keep, from some of the things we talked about when we did the Sumo Psycho episode about how bands have to sort of reinvent their relationships with their fandom. The fact that he's got that Patreon, and every single Sunday, even when he was on tour, he was in like a video log or sort of live chat thing where he was reading comments from people as he just talked about stuff. And the reason I signed up for his Patreon in the first place, was I saw that he was going to go through all the songs on Too Dark Park, and he basically went through the entire Skinny Puppy catalog, and he went through song by song. Well, this is the gear we used to record that, and this is where this sample came in, and this is how Dwayne did this, and I did this, and then Ogre did that, and then this is how we, put it all together, and Rave added, his part to it in the studio. And he just sat and for like 2 hours talked about each album. And the one on Too Dark Park was really the only one I really invested in and paid attention to, but it was amazing just listening to him talk about their process. And he's still doing that. He's still putting stuff out. And when that last Skinny Puppy show happened, he posted right after it and said, well, it's over. And he had a message, being thankful to, the crew and the collaborators, and to Ogre and to fans. And it was really cool to see somebody who, is now in his 60s still connecting with a modern sort of understanding of what it means to be part of the music industry right now with the way the internet functions and social media and that kind of stuff.
That's what I was going to say, because I don't do the Patreon thing, but I know that I think it's on Facebook where I follow. I see his stuff on Facebook or Instagram or something, because he had that whole thing he went through. He had some kind of skin cancer or something, and he
on
had
his
some
face,
surgery, and then he but he's very active.
Yep, very much so.
In a good way, it's not it's not very active buy my album, buy my album, buy my album.
He's not like a hype machine of his own.
And,
but he's building this goodwill You know, like he's connecting to people, and people actually feel connected to what's going on. And his Patreon is like $3 a month. I mean, it's nothing like, you know, some of the other ones where you might be paying 10, 20, you know, $30 a month, but you're constantly getting this inside track behind the scenes on what's happening, like a podcast almost, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a cool bit of news there, that those guys are still putting stuff out. I'm really curious to hear the rest of that album.
No, I am too, and now especially that you say that if the, you know, even if some shell of that was meant to be another Skinny Puppy.
Right. Yeah, it changes my whole take on, like, initially I was like, oh, cool, that's neat, I'll check it out sometime. But now that I've read that, I'm like, oh, I'm definitely checking. As soon as that drops, I'm going to listen to the whole thing, because, you know, I want to hear what might have been. It's kind of cool. Sticking with former Network Records artists and Canadians, if we move on, so Sarah McLaughlin just announced that she's doing a 30th anniversary tour of her album Fumbling Towards Ecstasy. And I know that this is maybe not, you know, your most, you know, anticipated release or information.
No. Okay, no.
Yeah. But I got way into Sarah McLaughlin around this time. I guess, you know, honestly, it was not really Fumbling Towards Ecstasy that I got way into. It's the one after that was like her huge giant hit, and her whole let's kick off Lilith Fair kind of tour thing.
Yeah.
But I did pick up Fumbling Towards Ecstasy because it was on Network, and I was like, what is this? Who is this person? And I liked songs on it. You know, I think there's a lot of great stuff, but it's way not like what I expected from something on Network after hearing like Skinny Puppy and Severed Heads, and, you know, it's not anywhere in that same vein. But it was just the other end of what kind of alternative sort of was at the time.
Yeah.
It was more over in the U2 and REM range of things rather than
which at that time was not, you know.
Yeah,
super
right.
It wasn't super mainstream or anything.
Right. You know, REM put out Green at the end of the 80s, and U2 had done Joshua Tree and, you know, Rattle and Hum, and was starting to do Octogen Baby and all that stuff.
Zeropa.
Yeah, Zeropa, right. Yeah. And REM was finally sort of cashing in on their MTV ability with Losing My Religion and all that kind of stuff. I hadn't realized that Fumbling Towards Ecstasy was from 93, because it feels earlier than that for whatever reason to me. Whereas, like, you know, Losing My Religion was 91. And we got to get back to having an episode just about 1991 and what a big year it was for music. There's a lot of weird stuff that year, a lot of cool stuff. But I thought it was interesting that she's touring for the 30th anniversary of that album and not the next one, because the album after that is the one that made her like a household name. It had the song from City of Angels. It's the album after Fumbling Towards Ecstasy is the one that sort of, like I said, kicked off the whole Lilith Fair thing. So it's interesting that she's chosen sort of where she cut her teeth on being, you know, a legit music star, rather than the thing that actually blew up for her.
Yeah. I was just looking at the track list of, I guess I don't also know the songs by name, so.
Yeah.
So was Surfacing the big one?
On that album?
No, the album.
Oh, the album
Surfacing.
after that. One moment.
I'm just looking on Spotify. It looks like Fumbling Towards Ecstasy is 93, and then Surfacing is 97. Is that big of a gap?
Might have been Surfacing. Yeah, let me double check. Here we go.
Because that's good.
Yeah, Surfacing. Surfacing was the big one.
97. Like,
yeah, it took her. Yeah, she really had like sort of came into her own. Then she also did a song with the guys in Delirium, the Frontline Assembly guys, that was huge. Was ridiculous. How big that became as sort of a remixed dance track thing.
So I was just looking too. So actually, because the song that jumps out, like when you say Sarah McLaughlin, the song that pops in my head is actually "Into the Fire," which is her '92 album,
Yeah.
Solace, which is
Solace,
before.
yeah.
But I think from a time frame standpoint, like that's where I heard her, which is again why I think like you're saying like it's weird that filming towards
and
Ecstasy
Into
is
the Fire
93,
definitely was a big single for her at the time for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. But Possession was the song from Fumbling Toward Ecstasy that was big.
Yeah. And see, off the top of my head, I can't think of that song. I know if as soon as I
you would know it as soon as you played it. But then on Surfacing, on that 97 album, she got a haircut. She, they kind of took her from this long-haired kind of flowy dress, kind of pseudo-alternative rock hippie-ish kind of stylings to somebody that was on the cover of Maxim and weird things like that. She was doing all kinds of press, and it was like, yeah, we're making you a pop star. And Building a Mystery got a ton of airplay. Adia got a ton of airplay. And then her song Angel is in City of Angels. And that soundtrack was just played beyond belief so many times. Because the soundtrack to that had a song by her and Goo Goo Dolls. That Iris song was like just massive. And I think Alanis Morissette might have had a song on that soundtrack. I don't know. But yeah, so it was just like a big deal there at the end of the 90s. I went to see Lilith Fair, and it was a great show, but then she was pregnant and had like sickness associated with, being pregnant, and so she didn't play her set. So, I got to see some cool stuff. I got to see Sinead O'Connor live. That was cool. But I've never seen Sarah McLaughlin, and I've been a, pretty decent fan. The other thing that came out right after that, then in '99, she released this live album, Mirror Ball, and I have the DVD of that, and it's really cool. Like the DVD is well produced. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on that DVD. It's worth checking out. After that, though, she didn't do anything for like 7 years, and then what she put out was a Christmas album. So, it took a while. Like, and then she didn't do anything again for another like 8 years. So she sort of was done, I think, being a pop star. She had enough of it there at the end of the 90s, and she had a kid to raise, and I think she went through a divorce. And so,
So this 30th anniversary, so it's a tour and the whole.
It's a tour, yeah. It's a tour of throughout the all of North America. Bunch of obviously Canadian dates, but also it's going to be in like most major cities, and tickets go on sale next week. So like the week, well, let's see. Yeah, or I think they go on sale this Friday. So like the 15th of December of 23, I think is when everything goes on sale. There's probably pre-sales already happening, if you've got the right credit card or whatever. But I thought that was just like, what a weird throwback kind of thing. Yeah. But it's the right time. Like, Alanis Morissette toured with Jagged Little Pill not long ago. Liz Phair just did a tour where I think she did all of her first album, I think.
Yeah.
So, 'tis the season, I suppose.
Well,
this kind of stuff.
It's got that, sort of 20 or 30 year sort of.
Yeah. Okay, so the next piece of news, and this is something that really I was like, what the hell are they talking about? So Rolling Stone has an article dated yesterday, December 12th, 23. LimeWire is back. What? But AI is making the music this time. And so LimeWire has apparently reinvented itself. And so now they've launched an AI music generator. This can only lead to some kind of insane set of meltdowns, I'm sure. Because, I mean, I suppose that they probably could have trained it differently than all of the art AI stuff. Because, you know, all of those art things, there's that big just surge of that in the last year of everybody using AI art generators. And
yeah, I don't know anything about that.
no, you wouldn't. If you haven't seen Dean's other Instagram accounts, you ought to check it out. But
it's been getting more and more impressive. But anyway,
yeah. Well, but then it's also being, you know, just attacked, and I'm torn about it.
I am too, and I was going to preface before we go down this road, because this could lead to a very long conversation and possibly worthy of its own separate.
Yeah.
Because there are a few things that I think I'm more on the fence about than AI, and because I'm actively using it, but also I'm torn between, which it just mirrors sort of my career and kind of everything in my life. Like I live in this both sides, so I'm like, I'm a creative, but only to some degree, and then I also live in, you know, like, right. I don't know, like, so I'm like, I see all the arguments for it's a tool, right, and the person driving the tool, and just like anything, like, you know, in the 70s when synthesizers came out and everybody thought music was dead because everybody's just gonna put, you know, but instead people, you know, once that craziness you got past that, and you're like, well, no, people are actually using this tool to make some really creative and amazing stuff, and like I think that's where this ultimately will go. But we're in that period right now where you're like, you know, I mean, also, yeah. So full disclosure, yeah, I have a Instagram account. I do a ton of AI art. I do not claim to be a artist in that regard. I'm not saying that you know, but I'm learning how to leverage the tech to do some things that I couldn't do. As you know, I can't draw that stuff. I could probably do some of that stuff in Photoshop if I spent 3 weeks straight doing it. Right. You know, so that's where I kind of bounce back and forth, because I'm like, you know, I don't know how I feel about people that are selling art.
That's one of those things that, and so
I'm not doing that.
Right.
But I also, having done it for the last 9 months or whatever, it takes skill and talent to figure out how to craft the prompts and generate the things you're trying to get. I'll have something in my head, and it is not as easy as I type a sentence and now that thing that was in my head is on the screen. You know, it's
yeah, all the memes that label something like the Muppets in Mad Max, it didn't just happen with that phrase. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, you know, so when I go back to that side of it, you know, it's the whole argument of the technology. You know, we had the conversation multiple times in this podcast has come up, you know, like, what would our music output be if we were born 15 years later? And
absolutely.
With the technology that we had available. Like, it's just, you know, this is a different type of technology and a different use model, and it has to come into its own, and it's invasive, and it's got a lot of people freaking out, but it's also, there's some really cool stuff.
Agreed.
So I don't know, you know.
Well, and this is one of those things where I'm mostly torn about the nature of the arguments that are being made, because a lot of times it's people who are trying to make a buck as a, you know, a visual artist, somebody who's an illustrator, somebody who's a painter, somebody who relies on the need for commercial art to pay their rent and that kind of thing. And then when you see that maybe other people in that same situation have been sort of the training mechanism for the AI, and so there's all of these effectively sampled pieces of working artists' art just pumped into this machine that spits them out in like a remixed sort of form, then yeah, you know, there's a problem there if somebody's trying to make a buck off of somebody else's work. Yeah. And yet we came of age in an era where remixes and mashups,
because, you know, then
Right.
Because then you have the argument of like, yeah, so there's that sort of like samples and remixes and stuff.
Right.
Like I ultimately, I think, sort of land on the side of the negative lands and bands like that.
Yeah,
like
right.
you're it's still your own art. You're using and the reality of like us doing music, we were influenced by all kinds of things. So there's the influence part, there's the actual physically using pieces, parts of a thing.
Right.
And I think when it comes to music, we are a little, we've gotten to a point of more comfort with that. Like it's easier to discern like, oh, this person's just completely ripping that off and is kind of a fraud, and this person's doing a really unique thing with some other people's bits and pieces of work.
Right.
So again, I think that the AI stuff is still needs to find its happy medium for some of that.
Right. I also get really frustrated at times, like with how sort of, I'm trying to pick a good adjective here. Like at first I want to say myopic, and that's unkind. but I think there's, when it's like, hey, this is robbing me of my livelihood, people have a very different reaction. And yet I think about like all of the sort of arguments that have been made about the sort of legitimacy of the identity or the struggle of like AI, if it were ever to become real, do the robots deserve to exist? Well, any artificial thing that pretends to be human or even achieve something that's human-like is going to have to sample human experience in order to achieve any kind of sentience. And what we're talking about with AI generated art isn't anywhere close to that. Yeah. But we've debated this in popular culture, like on Star Trek, when, Mr. Data paints a painting. Is that, one of these services just as a metaphor? Because he's not an artist if you think that, he's just remixing a bunch of samples and coming up with something that, is necessarily informed by other input. But things like also in Star Trek, you would never be able to have any of the stuff going on in the holodeck if you didn't have the entirety of human culture and art to do that. It just couldn't exist. And the one thing that sort of pushed back against me, because I was like, hey, well, what about this? This whole notion of how Star Trek handles it. And Andrew, who used to be in our band, he responded, well, Star Trek happens in a universe where they don't need money because they have replicators. So nobody has to starve because they can just, exist in this moneyless system. Yeah. And that would make things pretty different. That would be a very different.
Fair point. And I think ultimately that's part of where the controversy lies, is the motivation. I hope to feel comfortable, and I do feel comfortable right now, but like the stuff I'm doing because I enjoy it and I think it looks cool and I'm just sharing it, and that's it. And I'm like, and it's crossed my mind, I see people spitting it out there if somebody wants to buy a print of. I had people ask me if I sell it, and so far I've said no.
Right.
And I don't know, even that though, it's not so much. If I was just doing it just to generate money, and then you cross that line where you're like, well, now I'm actively looking for things to take or steal or use to make money. Suddenly the motivation becomes money based, and to me, then that's a very different world. If I'm doing it because I enjoy it, and at some point enough people were like, that one was really cool, I'd really like to buy that. I don't know if that's the same thing.
Right.
So.
Well, there's also like all the art movements from pretty much like the 20s and 30s on, like for the last 100 years of visual art and literature. The notion of what we now call remix has been hugely influential. You've got beatniks and modernists cutting up other people, like the newspaper, and gluing it back together as a poem. What's that? Who should get any kind of credit if if any of that stuff that William Burroughs was kind of messing around with in the 50s, is that just a different technology's version of what we see here? There's so many. We talked about the fact that, like, I doubt an album like, oh God, the Beastie Boys album.
Oh, Paul's Boutique.
Paul's Boutique, that's the one. Paul's Boutique, how would you make that now?
Right.
I mean, they could probably make it because they already made it in the past and are now, wealthy enough to clear everything and pay all the people. But it wouldn't happen for somebody new legally. It might, get passed around on the web somewhere and eventually, become something viral. But
that album's a perfect example of kind of where I feel like my definition of the line sort of falls, because you've got something that is, that album is 80% samples.
Yeah. Yeah.
If not more. Outside of them rapping, every single bit of that is other people's art. And all of those songs are completely unique. You would never mistake Hey Ladies for one of the songs that's sampled in it or something. So
Right.
And there's never a notion of any intent that they were doing that to just piggyback.
Yeah, it's
on
like
the success
they weren't being
of one of
lazy.
those songs.
It very much was not them just stealing other people's stuff to make a quick buck. They were trying to do something new with a cultural approach that's it is sort of defined by the fact that you have to take something and make something new out of what you got, because in the origins of that music, you got a record player, you got a tape deck, you've got whatever you've got, and you make new music out of the music that you have, because you don't have a piano and you don't have a violin and you don't have an electric guitar with a big Marshall stack. And to think that can't happen anymore, or it can only happen if you're backed by a wealthy enough conglomerate or corporation is, or the fact that it can happen and nobody can know about it, or you're going to get sued, or you're going to get a cease and desist. Those things very much do happen, and it's rough.
It's one of those things that's fascinating, I think, a little bit, because it comes down to the human nature of the intent, and because the intent is so opinion based, you can't really, so even like when we were first talking about doing this podcast and how we were going to approach it and how are we going to play music,
how can you play music,
and we're like, when the intent of what we're doing, we're not trying to make money by stealing other people's stuff,
right?
And it's clear, as obvious, as clear as day, but because someone can have the opinion that their art is stolen, or a lawyer thinks that, well, you use this thing and like you can't, I don't know, if we were trying to make money off this podcast now, we're suddenly infringing, that whole idea of infringing on something because we're just discussing something. I don't know. It's like, it seems so painfully obvious when someone is doing that maliciously and when they're not.
Right. Right. And it absolutely has to do with the fact that as much as the means of production have been made a little more egalitarian, as much as, anybody with a phone or whatever can record something, make something, build something, anybody who has access to a computer at the library can have a blog or publish a book, or, it doesn't cost that much to print out the stuff you type, and you can type infinitely because, people give stuff away. It's still something that is controlled by a really narrow range of people as far as how you can actually do anything with it. And the nature of journalism being so weirdly different that like, newspapers are dead, and online news is just a way to get clicks, just generating clicks. Yeah. The way in which the way in which capitalism ultimately has put us in the spot that we're in, where you have to pay for something in certain ways or be independently wealthy in order to really do a lot of this stuff. It's interesting to me that there are so many people getting famous by covering music. you know, but that's what's familiar. That's all over the place. And the only platform that is making it worthwhile to cover music in that way is YouTube, because Google has figured out how to pay the people who own the rights and let you still put it on your own website and generate your own traffic and do your own thing with it. But there are cover bands that make thousands of dollars covering songs on YouTube, making music videos of their covers, touring to support being a cover band. It's bonkers.
Well, and it's crazy that happens, but someone else could use, part of a drum sample of some song and not be able to do anything with it, and it's completely different. That cover song, the intent of that is I'm replicating this song that's popular, and I'm now going to generate money from,
But somebody, the owner gets a cut with the way that they're doing it, and that's the trade-off. Is you got your mechanical reproduction rights, and as long as you pay that. And there are smart companies that are saying, yeah, you can cover our stuff. It only costs this much. Yeah. But
that's where, so again, I think sometimes the intent seems so obvious, but it's super blurred by, the financial piece of all this thing. I was going to say the one AI thing that does bug the crap out of me, or that I don't understand why some apps are going down that road, is the stuff that here, type in a bunch of words and we'll make it sound like Drake is singing it, or Beyonce is singing it, because what is the use model for that besides you're trying to pretend like you sound,
oh yeah
that one I don't get, that one I'm
that one, so that's one of those things too where the whole strike by the actors, and what Disney has done in The Mandalorian and the new TV series where they've de-aged Mark Hamill, because it's not really Mark Hamill, it's a deep fake of Mark Hamill where his voice is actually still Luke Skywalker, but an entirely different actor is playing him, and then they're mapping his face onto it. And the legitimate fear of that kind of thing being what kept Andy Serkis from winning an Oscar at one point for Lord of the Rings. The votes against Avatar. The year that Zero Dark 30 won the Oscar, I believe Avatar was up against it, the first one. And there were people in the Academy who were absolutely concerned about the technology being used to animate these characters, putting them out of business and making them lose a job. And these, 20 years later, almost 15 years later, maybe they weren't that wrong, but the fact that now people are concerned that, what did I sign away the rights to? Can you still use my likeness to make movies without me in it, so you don't have to pay me anymore? You can pay me significantly less. And that being a significant part, that and streaming being the significant parts of what was happening with the actor strike. Yeah, I get that. I understand some of that, but I also think that the technology is being blamed for the shittiness that has existed in all of these entertainment industries for
It's
ever.
Again, it comes down to the intent and the use of that technology. So the technology that can make me, I can hum a tune in here and it sounds like somebody else famous is singing it. That's cool technology, but if the use model is for me to release something and pretend it's, some famous artist, or to replicate, then that's, the intent is wrong. The intent is backward.
Right. Well, and the other piece of this that's so interesting to me, having lived in Japan for 5 years, and during the time when the Vocaloid was sort of becoming a thing. So Vocaloids are these artificial pop idols. They're voice banks that allow you to write music and, write songs. And then there's this sampled voice from a voice actor that is this character. And the big one is Hatsune Miku. And it's you'll often see this anime character with twin ponytails, and she's got kind of aqua colored hair and a short skirt. And she's not a character in any kind of comic book or animation or anything. She's a fake idol. She's but like they'll hold concerts where they'll project her onto a stage or onto a screen or whatever, and she'll sing a whole bunch of songs, and all of it is processed through this set of algorithms and sample banks and stuff that make this voice for this virtual character. And there's several of them, and a few by the same company, but she's the one that's the biggest, and it's huge. It's this massive industry. Yeah. And this is the kind of stuff that, like, cyberpunk authors like William Gibson have been writing about for 20, 30, 40 years. When do we stop needing movie stars and pop idols because we can just have the computer do it for us? And when's it going to matter anymore? I honestly think a lot of this is going to have a reaction kind of thing where, like, there's going to be sort of like, craft brewing and craft anything, and that whole notion of, like, let's get back to basics and let's get back to the real stuff. There will be a whole movement to, like, stream everything down and make sure that we're back to what real music is, and, like, people who actually have these outrageous skills playing musical instruments and these wonderful vocal talents will be buoyed by this and become popular because it will be seen as more authentic. It will be seen as more, legitimate in some way. And I don't know if I agree that it's more legitimate in some way, but I also think that, it's going to come in waves.
Well, yeah. And so it's funny that we went down this road because I saw something earlier today, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it was talking about the AI art stuff in particular. But it was basically saying, it was somebody saying that, like, kind of, we're right now in that phase where everybody is just spitting a bunch of stuff into there and doing all this stuff, and eventually the actual creative people will leverage the technology the right way. Right. And it'll become what it will ultimately be. And I'm not saying I may be on one side or the other of that fence, but, I may end up just being one of those people that played around with it for 9 months or 12 months and then that was it. Or, I keep going with it and I find new ways to do something with it, and then I'm now leveraging the technology for the creative thing that it ultimately will be leveraged for in the right way. Like right now, just everybody's, just a bazillion people using Midjourney and all these other tools,
right?
Just, and that will all start to die down to people who are actually trying to learn it and do something. If you're doing that, it's gonna filter out the I'm just trying out this cool new thing level of people. And I think I'm sure historically that's kind of the same thing that's happened with a lot of big new flashy technology like this.
It's
new innovations.
Yeah, like,
I mean, thousands of people bought sampling keyboards, but there's not thousands of people putting out all that kind of music,
exactly. Exactly. And the number of people who are doing that Ferris Bueller, cough and sneeze into it and play Mary Had a Little Lamb, there's a lot of people that any new technology is going to be a toy. And then there's going to be the people who turn the toy into something real and useful and valuable. And I think the fact that all of this is being categorized as AI is part of the problem too, honestly. It's machine learning, it's algorithmic, data processing. There's nothing smart. Like, the computer's not gaining intelligence from doing this, and this is not a sign that computers will be able to, quote unquote, make art of any sort anytime soon. It is just another process in the ways in which we can fragment and replicate things faster.
Yeah. I think that, and I think why it's kind of caught on, it's probably more the Chat GPT type of stuff that's feeding that thing, because you're legitimately talking to your computer now.
Right.
We were doing it with Siri and Alexa and all that stuff for a little while, but now it's like,
and it's spitting back stuff that actually seems sensible and relevant.
But all it is you're now able to use the way we talk to each other to ask your computer questions, where before you had to be a computer programmer and know how to punch in the right stuff to research the right data to get back something that you then had to parse out. It's just both sides of the equation now are more humanistic language and whatever, so you can type into ChatGPT, hey, write me a thing about blah, blah, and you can use very casual language.
Right.
And then get back something that it now knows what you mean, but it's still just a computer knowing what to take with that input and, and leverage, on top of the fact that it can leverage, years and years of internet data.
Right.
And the way we talk to each other and the way we search things and the way we look at stuff and the way we understand stuff.
It makes
spit it back at us in a way that we understand.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes my day job harder as a high school English teacher.
Oh, I'm sure.
But it also gives me the opportunity to force students to think about what they're producing and how they're producing it and like why they need some of the skills, because if they turn something in and I'm like, you didn't write this, and they're like, how do you know? How do you think I know? Because it's pretty obvious when I have you write with a pencil in the room, and then when you turn this in, that these are two different, outcomes. And I can tell because I have the sophistication to do that, and you could learn to be that sophisticated in your ability to parse a text, to recognize a tone or a voice or whatever. I find that as, okay, this is just part of the challenge of having the kind of job that I've chosen. But there are teachers who are melting down over this. Like, oh, my entire, worldview is different. And I think it's because they haven't kept up with the necessities of technology and where things are going. If you're just still struggling at 50 years old in 2023 to turn your computer on and use it for something useful, what the hell have you been doing for the last 30 years? Jesus. Yeah. I mean, come on. There's a different, literacy means something different now. And I think, it's interesting too. Okay. So here, let me take us a left turn back into art for a minute. But so I've been reading some things from some kind of reactionary, kind of conservative voices that maybe didn't start out that way, or maybe sort of, I'm surprised that some of this stuff is coming together. But there's a real strong reaction lately about postmodernism. And by that, the notion that art can be almost anything, that whole notion of the chop things up and put it back together, and that can be art, that, where surrealism, like Dali and, the guy's painting, the Magritte painting where this is not a pipe, and, all of that kind of, toilet bowls and weird sculptures, just that whole weirdness of the early part of the 20th century. And then all of the reactions to that in writing and theory and knowledge construction, that really kind of killed some kind of essence of humanity and beauty, and that we don't value anything that's real and actually takes talent, because we've just decided that nothing matters except how well we can talk about it. So everything is just BS because, that's what academia and colleges have told us. And just almost the silliness of having to still have a fight like that 50 years later. just seems like, number one, I don't know that anybody who talks and thinks and works that way in academia actually hates beauty or thinks that talented painters are the same as cereal box designers. Some of the statements being made about what happens if you devalue sort of traditional modes of art, I think are just stupidly, and I really mean this, stupidly short-sighted and reductionist. They're just taking a different way to think about thought, a different way to think about human experience, and turning it into this. All of these lefty intellectuals hate God and beauty and art and families and love and anything real and wholesome, which is just crazy. It's so bonkers to me. I don't know. This is definitely taking a tangent, so we can steer it back a little bit. But
well, that makes you think of Taylor Swift's birthday, and so
yes, exactly. And the way that I hate everything that's good and beautiful.
Callback.
I mean, she's obviously the epitome of the American, sweetheart, and I need to have some value for the real wholesome things she's talking about. We might need to just rethink the last 3 minutes. It might not need to make it into the podcast.
No, I don't know. Well, we definitely. That's why, as soon as we even dipped our toes into the AI thing, I was like, "This will clearly go down a different level."
Yeah.
But,
yes.
And that's fine.
So LimeWire, they've gotten rid of all of their file sharing notions. And the idea is just that they're trying to keep the brand and redeploy the brand because it's got some traction. But now it's called LimeWire AI Music Studio. You can describe a track you want to hear by writing about it and giving a mood and a genre and maybe uploading some pictures and colors and shapes. And then the thing spits out a song or, some kind of piece of sound that tries to match that. And it's hit or miss is what the Rolling Stone article says. But sometimes it can be pretty accurate. And the example they give, they put in dainty violin piece that sounds like being outdoors on a sunny day. And they got a musical output that...
A dainty violin piece that sounds...
they fit that pretty well.
Yeah, I've barely dabbled in that a little. I looked at a few only because... So one of the things I do in my day job is a lot of kind of reworking video assets that we have and or filming some new stuff, and we for whether it's organic, social, or some of the stuff we're doing. And so I'll usually start with the sort of royalty free tracks that you can find, but on occasion you're like nothing's really working. And so to me, a tool like this, I'm like, let me just I kind of know what I need, and it's sort of hard to find the sort of royalty-free, generic whatever. So if an AI tool can give me a generic whatever, it's just background music. It's not meant to be, it's not going to hit the Billboard charts. It's not, it's literally meant to just sort of, again, to me, that sort of, the intent of that is I'm not trying to generate some music with to make me $1 million. I literally just, this video doesn't quite work unless there's some really low volume music there that does something. I don't know.
Right.
It's,
Well, and I think about some of the other opportunities that don't come into this, but, let's say you've got somebody who was a musician who was in some kind of really unfortunate accident and has lost their ability to play their instrument. But that person can describe something beautifully into this tool and can still compose music because they have the actual expertise. Like you mentioned, the people who actually know what they're doing, they get a new tool and now they can use it to do something pretty amazing. I mean, even some of the very, this is a rudimentary, but the fact that Rick Allen from Def Leppard could keep playing the drums with that band for almost 40 years now after losing his arm is the first step toward, if there's somebody who had an amazing voice and suffered throat cancer, but could describe something and sample themselves and create other songs that it sounds like them singing, even though they can't sing anymore. There's so many things like that just putting the whole thing together in one package of this is bad because it rips people off. It's not the tool that's ripping the people off. It's other people ripping the people off.
Yeah. It's the use of the tool. Again, I think us talking through this has more affirmed my stand. It comes down to the intent.
Right.
The tools we all want and need, I think, technology to keep advancing. I know it's been relatively exponential in our lifetimes compared to other generations and stuff, so that's a different thing to adjust to and get used to. But in the end, it's the use of the tool. Any technology that you could think of that's come to fruition in hundreds of years. I mean, it's all come down to what was it used for.
Right.
You know, the technology behind certain weapons of warfare and other things. That technology also has very positive uses that just...
Right.
You know,
there's the big danger, right? The people like, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Okay, did I just say that about, AI doesn't plagiarize, people plagiarize? Am I making the same argument? I don't know that
exactly,
I am. But I really don't honestly think that I am making the same argument. But I do think that we have to be aware of, what we are enabling and then what we are buying into, so that if we do just start giving more money to people who are actually just ripping off other people, okay, it seems like, to me, honestly, part of the problem is the system that equates art with money in the way that it does, and the fact that whoever controls the way you distribute that art is the one who's really going to make the money. Right. And the artist has to take what they can get out of all of that.
Yeah.
And so
I was just going to say that piece has been a thread of 8 different other conversations that we've had about other, whether we're talking about Spotify and we're talking about
right.
So yeah, in that regard, this is just another piece of that same conversation. It's the people who own those things that are,
Yeah, absolutely. That, and if you're aching for the good old days where, you could just, record a CD. It's like, what good old days were those? CDs were so stupidly overpriced. Like, there was no reason that a CD cost $20 in 1988 and the cassette cost $13. Like, that $5 difference was all profit because the production of that CD did not cost a third more than the production of a cassette. It probably cost less. Right. And especially by the end of the 90s, Jesus, CDs just had such a high margin. That's why the music industry flipped out when you could duplicate that digital quality and replicate it on file sharing,
because those companies already knew how cheap it was to do all
right,
that. But
right.
Then, that's the intent. The intent of those people was...
Yeah, right. Yeah, profit was absolutely the way all that worked. And, so, right, like, I also don't think that there's any magical good old days coming back around. Like, I don't think we're going to get back to a time when the mythological artist getting their due is going to happen. But the savvy artists are the ones who are like figuring this stuff out now. Yeah. And understanding how this can become part of their workflow, or how to prevent it from disrupting their workflow or whatever. Hell, as a person who spent a significant amount of my life trying to become a functionally pretty capable writer, who spent a decent chunk of that studying and practicing the art of poetry, I can tell you that the only way poetry has ever made me any money was by teaching creative writing classes. I've been paid $1 for a poem once. By a publisher. And that's all. And so, popular music did more damage to poetry as a commodity, or as a something you can sell, than anything else, because it's just the evolution of the art form. I chose to study poetry because I appreciated it and I wanted to hone that art, but I never expected it to be a career. And I never thought anybody owed me that career.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say. So I'm glad you actually ended with that, because what I was going to say was you're talking about artists being savvy, and we're never going to get back to these good old days. But I think the savviness is tied directly to expectation. Yeah. And so your description of what your take on exploring poetry, you had expectations, and those were, our Sumo Cycle conversation. Like,
right.
I don't think their expectation is that they're on TVs everywhere and they're the top band touring in stadiums, but they're doing the parts necessary to be able to have a life playing music.
Right.
And they have realistic expectations, and I think that's the same for any of these things. I think that's where the struggle comes in, is when, is the person thinking that they're going to be the next Harry Styles or whatever, and then got these completely unrealistic expectations. It's a struck by lightning, winning the lottery kind of crapshoot.
Right.
But if you are truly just trying to make some form of art, like you saying with poetry or any of the stuff, or what we're doing, when any of that kind of stuff, like, if you have realistic expectations and then you're able to build on those and grow on those, and you'll accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
Right on. And I think it's really important just to be realistic about the fact that, like, as much as I was talking about those, cover bands, I don't mean to dismiss those cover bands. They're smart. Like, they're making a living often doing what they want to do, which is being musicians. But the way that they're doing it is not in a club anymore, not as a session player, not 4 nights a week at this bar and the other 3 nights a week at some other set of bars, and playing in 5 bands as like a mercenary drummer or whatever. They've figured out a way to play the music that they want, occasionally make their own original stuff, get it out there, but they're leveraging things like YouTube and Patreon and Spotify and whatever else they've got to build this hype. And I think it's very telling that the way that almost anyone in any of these areas actually makes money is through something like Patreon. And Patreon basically is people deciding to give you money, full stop. I mean, we are back at, wealthy landed aristocrats letting artists live in one of their mansions if they painted a portrait of everybody in the family. I mean, it's like people, except now that it's middle class people who have disposable income and say, I can give you $5 or $10 a month because I want to see you keep making music videos or any other kind of video on YouTube. I appreciate your OnlyFans and I want all of your naked pictures. Here's, $10 a month, or, whatever the heck it is that people are doing. It's the ones who make it work can't do it just through ad revenue, can't do it just through, clicks and affiliate links and whatever. It's eventually they have to say, if you think what I'm doing has value for you, please consider going over to this website and creating a monthly auto payment to me of $1, $3, $5, $10, $20 a month.
Yeah.
As soon as 1,000 people do $5 a month, and that's 1,000 people all over the planet, not 1,000 people in Chicago. As soon as 1,000 people give you $5 a month, that sounds like with a roommate I could pay my rent. And that's bonkers. But I'm not going to sell 1,000 CDs at $5 or $10 a pop every single month.
Right.
And it's just a different, way of conceiving of artistry and musicianship and whatever else that you're trying to get people revved up about.
Well, and I think then, and it leads itself to that connection. So if we dovetail back to like the Kevin Key piece of things, or some of these other people, or again the Sumo Psycho episode we talked about, like, I think that added piece of connecting with people, whereas where I kicked it off mentioning Taylor Swift, but Taylor Swift may have millions and millions and millions of fans, and there's this sort of faux connection with her fans in that but it feels very manufactured and
yeah, totally.
versus Kevin Key's got a Patreon and he's talking because those people are like he's getting into all these nuances and he's literally like
right.
You know, I mean, and maybe there isn't anything different than that, but it just seems like there's something different there.
Kevin
like, I don't
Key,
think.
Yeah, he turns on his chat while he's talking to the camera, and then like Bubba 47 goes by and says something, and he's like, "Oh yeah, Bubba 47, yeah, I did do that with that synthesizer," and it's real. Like he's talking to you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but she might wave at you from the stage.
Right. It's just, and some of it might be she may fully intend to wish that she could have that, but when you have that big of a fan base and you're that big of a pop star, it's not even feasible. Like,
well, yeah, and I can't. I would honestly, I wouldn't blame her if she doesn't want that, because the performative nature of her entire life, she can't even have a relationship without there being pictures of it all over every news outlet in the world. That as much as like when you get famous, you get what you ask for, but those people, it has to weigh on them. So
sure.
The fact that she doesn't want that, okay. If she really, really didn't want it, she could just stop, doing music that way. So obviously she does want it to some degree, yeah. But yeah, it's just, yeah, it's about scale. It's a different level, and that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Kevin Key wants to be Taylor Swift.
No.
He's plenty fine with his $3 a month from... But I think about that, too. Like, okay, I'm sure in that Facebook group for Skinny Puppy, there's got to be several thousand people, hundreds at the very least. And I'm guessing probably thousands of people are interested in Skinny Puppy stuff and finding information about it on Facebook. If only 10% of them paid that dude $3 a month on his, Patreon, that's not bad. I mean, there's an income there.
Yeah.
All right. So, that's all the news that I pulled up. There's a couple other things that I could talk about, but I don't think they're as interesting as any of the stuff we just brought up. Is there anything that you've encountered in the news in the last week or three that has stuck out to you?
I'm going to say no.
Okay. All right.
Partly because it's midnight and partly because,
Yeah. All right.
Well, and I do feel like our last week's conversation was that was the music piece that had sort of domineered my brain space for a bit. So.
Right on. Yeah. Well, I think some of this stuff, it's actually got me kind of interested in what's going on. I may try to go to that Sarah McLaughlin tour when she comes through Chicago. Yeah. I definitely will pick up that Cyberaktif thing. Like I'll check it out, and if I can find it on vinyl, or if they even sell it on vinyl, I'll probably buy that. And I'm looking forward. I actually really, really like Delirium. It's weird. Like Frontline Assembly has never fully clicked for me. Like if it's on, I won't turn it off necessarily.
Yeah.
But Cyberaktif I loved, and Delirium I love. And so I'm glad that those guys are making music.
Yeah. I know there's some Delirium EP that I had bought. The one that it's kind of red. There's like 4 songs on it. It's really old. And I remember I played the crap out of that in like probably 89, 90, 91. Like,
oh, wow.
But some of their stuff
early.
but some of their stuff is very sort of world music-y, right?
The first couple of albums, yeah. I think their stuff is on Spotify. I'm pretty sure that there's stuff there.
Some of it is, but I think the CP might not be.
Okay. So...
Oh, it is. It's actually the very first, Euphoric EP, 1991.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That and Semantic Spaces I would listen to.
Yeah, Semantic Spaces and Karma are the 2 I got. And I listened to...
So I never had Karma.
Karma's the one... It also came out in 97, and it's the one that has the Sarah McLaughlin tune on it. And then Poem is actually really cool, too. And it's got a bunch of collaborations. Sixpence None the Richer singer does a song with them. And Medieval Babes do a song with them.
Stuff on here, but...
Yeah. Yeah, Semantic Spaces is great too, and it's a little more worldy and a little more ethereal, kind of ambient at times.
Yeah, the Euphoric EP, which I didn't realize is the very oldest thing on here.
So there's like 5 releases before that, but they go back only to 89. So, and they're on this label called Dossier, and I don't know anything about that, but I've seen like Morpheus and Cyrophenicon and Spiritual Archives. Those are like the old releases. And then Euphoric was on Third Mind, Spheres is on Dossier, and then they get on Network. And like Network does everything up until 2012, and then they're on Metropolis. Of course, because all good EDM
Right.
acts end up on Metropolis. Or anybody who used to be on Network and uses a computer in their music ends up on Metropolis. But yeah, like there's a bunch of great music there. Semantic Spaces is the one that's kind of blue and orange, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll have to check out some more of their stuff because I apparently only really am familiar with the early. And then like Frontline Assembly for me, they're sort of their mid period is what I like when there was a lot of sample guitar kind of stuff. I like a bunch of those albums. They remind me there's some stuff that starts to get Swamp Terrorists-y and that kind of like they get a little bit KMFDM guitar-y. So, but before we go down a whole path of, we could talk for 2 hours about all those little crossover.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Area.
Well, we want to thank everybody for listening. This has been one of the most rambly conversations we've had, but and we definitely digressed into other areas other than music. But if you have any feedback, responses, or anything, look for us on our website. Look for us on Facebook. Again, it's Exit 181. And if you do Exit 181 podcast, I think Google will get you to the right place pretty quickly. If you want to look at our video episodes that we did over the last about 6 months, please check us out on YouTube. Hopefully we'll be back again pretty soon with another episode. And in the meantime, please share this podcast with your friends. Let people know about it. If we've made you angry, that's okay too. Tell all your friends to hate us as long as they click and come listen. It'll be fine. And if you actually like what you hear, by all means, tell people, spread the word. We look forward to talking to you again really soon. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.